welcome to the show. You're watching Tech24. I'm Julia Seeger. It's a world first. NASA's OSIRIS-REx spacecraft has performed a sample snagging operation on an asteroid in deep space. The goal, learn more about the solar system's early days and the rise of life on Earth. And this week we also tell you more about the mysterious Robin Hood-like cyber attack. The hacking group DarkSide has donated stolen money to charities with bitcoins. We'll ask cybersecurity consultant and former member of the anonymous group Jake Davis what he thinks of this latest attack. And one of NASA's robotic spacecrafts briefly touched down on an asteroid some 320 million kilometers away from Earth. OSIRIS-REx landed on Bennu in the hopes of collecting rocky samples. The U.S. Space Agency's chief said the mission outperformed in every way. Yenna Lee has the story.
It's a $800 million mission to pick up small pieces of stone, and it came down to a crucial few seconds.
We're going in.
NASA scientists say it went as smoothly as they had hoped.
All right.
Sampling is in progress.
A NASA spacecraft was programmed to pick up samples from Asteroid Bennu. The team behind the project is confident the so-called touch and go event was a success.
The bottom line is, from analysis of the images that we've gotten down so far, is that the sampling event went really well, as good as we could have imagined it would.
With its long robotic arm and bottles of nitrogen gas, the spacecraft stirred up the asteroid's rocky surface, a technique to try and catch bits of rubble from the celestial body.
After the event, when the gas bottle gets fired, you can see that particles are flying all over the place. We really did kind of make a mess on the surface of this asteroid, but it's a good mess. It's the kind of mess we were hoping for. Lots of material has been mobilized.
Bennu is more than 4.5 billion years old and is situated some 320 million kilometers away. Researchers hope the samples from the primitive object can tell us more about the origins of the solar system and life on Earth. The project has been far from simple, though. The asteroid is almost as tall as the One World Trade Center and makes a complete rotation every 4 hours. Meanwhile, the US spacecraft is the size of an SUV that had to avoid massive boulders to find a landing spot. The mission isn't over yet. It'll take an estimated 3 years for the spacecraft to bring its findings back to Earth.
The fifth edition of Z Event has come to an end, with gamers raising nearly 6 million euros after playing for more than 50 hours. Z Event is an annual rendezvous during which streamers get together to support a different charity during a marathon stream on Twitch. This year, the money has been donated to Amnesty International. And speaking of donations to charity organizations, this time a group of black hat hackers called DarkSide has decided to donate stolen money to charities. They posted receipts for $10,000 in Bitcoin to prove it. Now, this move is troubling authorities in what is described by some as a first for cybercrime. The group is known to extort money from victims via so-called ransomware attacks. Well, earlier we spoke to Brett Callow, who's a cyber threat analyst over at MCSoft, and asked him what exactly is a ransomware and how attackers are getting in.
In the simplest of terms, a ransomware attack locks up a company's data and demands a ransom to unlock it. A relatively new aspect of ransomware attacks is that the hackers also steal companies' data and use the threat of releasing this as additional leverage to extort payments. In terms of how they gain access to networks, that is primarily in one of two ways. Firstly, through phishing emails with malicious attachments, and secondly, through improperly secured internet-facing servers. The number of attacks have increased considerably in recent years, as has the severity of the incidents. If you turn the clock back to 2018, the average ransom demand was about $5,000, and most of the victims were small businesses. Today, the average demand is about $200,000. Multi-million demands are increasingly normal. The victims include governments, hospitals, multinationals.
Well, for more on this, let's bring in cybersecurity consultant and former member of the hacking group Anonymous, Jake Davis. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
So, what do we actually know about this new black hat hacking group called the Dark Side? And tell us more about the attack itself.
DarkSide is a very interesting group in terms of the development of ransomware over time. So there have been a few groups like DarkSide, and by that I mean in the past you'd get sort of not very professional looking, not very glossy looking individuals just planting ransomware in a company, silently getting the ransom and maybe paying that they may pay on or may not pay, and the ransomware group may or may not give the money back. And now we've got this new wave of very professional looking groups that have manifestos and glossy homepages, and in the case of DarkSide they even have customer support, which essentially means that people they've infected with ransomware can contact them, and they have a very detailed timeline of what they'll do if you don't pay the ransom, when they'll release the information online. They also host victims' information and threaten to give it to the media if the company doesn't pay up. And so it's very organized. And recently, of course, they've decided to very publicly announce that they've taken money from victims and given them to charities.
Now, is this something new to extort money like that and then decide to give it back to a charity? I mean, why is this attack troubling to experts?
This has been an interesting one. A lot of experts have come out and said they're quite puzzled by the fact that a group for the first time ever is taking from the rich, giving to the poor. But I don't think this is anything particularly new. I think there is something unique about this, and that's that they've made it very public that that's what they've done. In the past, a lot of groups that do this just keep quiet about it. And the reason they keep quiet about it is because if they announce exactly who they've given money to, those people cannot accept the money. And this is indeed the case with the DarkSide donations. Every charity that's been approached has essentially said, well, that we know now that this money comes from criminal activity, we can't accept it. It's impossible for the charities to accept the money. So really what's happened is they've taken money from companies and essentially given it to the government, because that's who will confiscate the money, or given it back to law enforcement. And then it has raised some interesting questions about charities that accept anonymous cryptocurrency donations. And if, for example, DarkSide had donated the money to the charity and then said nothing, it's very likely the charity would have been able to keep that money, or certainly they would have no way of knowing where it came from. So I think this stuff does happen, but this is the first time that it's been made so public, and ironically, nobody gets the money.
Now, it seems like ransomware attacks are becoming more and more common since the beginning of the year. How many groups use this operating mode, would you say?
It's an interesting question when we think about how much ransomware is out there compared to exactly how many groups are distributing it. There's quite a few known types of ransomware that have been sort of packaged up and distributed in similar ways, maybe a dozen or so. But there could be thousands of individuals that engage in what's called ransomware as a service, which is, say, larger groups that are involved in designing, manufacturing said ransomware. Just set up a page and say, okay, look, individuals can download our ransomware, download the virus, if you will, if you'd like to call it that, and then you go and infect victims. And once you infect the victims and they pay the ransom, you get a cut of the ransom. And so what we're seeing are very, very low-level individuals on the same skill level as, let's say, scammers that send fake emails and fake texts. All they're doing is acquiring the ransomware, which they didn't code, they probably don't know how it works, sending it to the victim, and they themselves get a cut of the ransom. And so we're seeing that increase a lot. And we're seeing ransomware in general increase because hackers, malicious hackers, cyber criminals, have started to realize that it pays. Companies do pay the ransom, and it's very provable that companies pay the ransom, even if they don't admit it, because of the nature of Bitcoin, the nature of the blockchain technology and the public ledger. We can see that many companies have paid out millions of dollars in ransom, even though they've released nothing to say they have.
Now, Jake, precisely, if you were to help and advise companies, what would you tell them, to pay or not to pay?
In an ideal world, you would not pay the ransom because this encourages more ransomware, right? And this is what ransomware groups rely on. And there's even wars between ransomware groups, the ones that do always give the files back and the ones that don't, the ones that do consider it bad business if they don't return the files, and so they will hack each other. But a company will, I think, even if advised not to pay the ransom, will pay the ransom, because let's say they don't have backups of the files, they can't get the files back, they have to pay the ransom. Otherwise, the loss of files is worth more than the ransom paid. And let's say even if they do have a backup, but the files the group stole were extremely sensitive, they'll still pay the ransom, because groups are becoming more sophisticated. And in the past, they didn't really care so much about the actual files as the ransom. But now with DarkSide especially, we're seeing the fact that they know exactly what they've stolen, they know exactly what media to send it to, how to resell it, that the actual information is also worth more than the ransom, whether or not the company has a backup. And so it would be good advice to say don't pay the ransom, but companies do pay the ransom even if that advice is given, and this has been the case many, many times.
Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you. It's great to speak to you.
And that actually brings us to the end of this week's edition of Tech 24. But this week, we leave you with this incredible time lapse of an explosion of a star. Snapshots taken by NASA's Hubble telescope have been assembled into this telling movie of a titanic stellar blast. See you next time.